In heaven, there was war. It wasn't an argument. It was not a silent tension. It was war. On the one hand, Miguel. On the other, the rebels. And when Revelation 12 says that Michael and his angels battled the dragon, there is a detail that almost no one notices. Michael does not appear as someone lost in the chaos. He appears leading. But why? Why Miguel? Why is he ahead? Why, the moment conflict explodes in this spiritual world, is it his name that comes up? Imagine the scene. A rebellion begins where no one would expect it, not on earth, not among ordinary men, but in an invisible dimension, where spiritual forces move with authority, order, and purpose. And then, in the center of this conflict, Miguel stands up. Not as a decorative symbol, not as a distant figure, but as a commander. What was at stake was not just a battle between angels. It was a rupture, an attempt to oppose God's order. And this is where everything changes, because Miguel doesn't lead by chance. Its presence reveals something about authority, defense, hierarchy, and spiritual warfare that many people read too quickly and miss. In this video, you will understand who Miguel is, why he leads the defense, how angelic armies can work, what kind of hierarchy appears in this war, and why this confrontation is not as simple as it seems. But first of all, keep this. When Miguel enters the scene, the conflict has already reached the point of no return. And the question is, what happened to make heaven need war? There is something in this text that many people read too quickly. Revelation 12:7 does not begin by trying to explain everything. He simply opens the scene with a heavy phrase, "There was war in heaven." And that should make anyone stop. Because if there was war in heaven, then there was opposition. If there was opposition, there was rebellion. And if there was rebellion, someone needed to resist. But the text does not just say that God won. It shows Michael leading angels. And this detail opens up a huge question. Why does God allow Michael to appear as a leader in this conflict? Not because God needs help, not because the sky was in despair, but because there is a spiritual order that operates under divine authority. And it is this order that the video will gradually reveal. Miguel does not appear as a secondary character. He appears at the exact point where the defense needs to be organized. This means that your role is not just to fight. Its function is to guard, resist, protect, and execute a spiritual response against a rebellious force. But there is one detail. Daniel 10 shows Michael being called one of the first princes, someone who enters into spiritual battle when there is unseen resistance. In other words, even before Revelation shows the war in heaven, Daniel already leaves a clue. Miguel acts when there is conflict in regions that human eyes cannot reach. So the question is not just who won. The real question is, what kind of war requires Miguel's presence? And when this answer begins to appear, you will realize that this battle talks much more about authority, order, and spiritual defense than it seems. Michael does not appear many times in the Bible, but when it appears, something serious is happening. That already says a lot. The Bible does not present Michael as an ordinary angel entering simple scenes or resolving small details. It arises in moments of conflict, resistance, and protection, as if his name is only mentioned when the situation crosses a line. In Daniel 10:13, Michael is called one of the first princes. This points to position, authority, and responsibility. He's not just watching. He is involved in battles that take place behind what men can see. But there is an important detail. Miguel does not act like the owner of war. He acts as a servant of God's order. This difference changes everything, because many people imagine Miguel as an independent figure, almost separate from the divine plan. But the biblical text shows something else. Michael moves within the authority of God. He fights, but not willingly. He leads, but not above the Lord. He defends it, but because there is a mission. And this is where his figure becomes even stronger. Miguel appears to represent an organized defense, a firm response against that which tries to disrupt the spiritual order. When the rebellion rises, he doesn't show up to talk to the chaos. He appears to resist. So who is Miguel? He is a spiritual prince, an angelic leader, defending in times of conflict. But there is still a deeper question. If Miguel has this defense role, why was he placed on the front line against the rebels? Miguel leads because the conflict was not small. This is the first thing that needs to be clear. When Revelation 12 shows Michael and his angels battling the dragon, the text is not a disorganized mess. It shows two sides, two forces, from his movements. On one side, Michael and his angels. On the other, the dragon and his angels. This reveals order, even within the conflict. But there's a detail that almost no one notices. Miguel isn't just facing an enemy. He is defending a spiritual frontier. Because every rebellion tries to do one thing first: invade a place that doesn't belong to it. And maybe that's why Miguel appears. Its function is linked to resistance, to the defense, to the protection of what God has established. In Daniel 10, it arises when there is spiritual opposition, preventing a response. In Revelation 12, it arises when the rebellion reaches open confrontation. In both cases, Miguel appears where there is blockage, resistance, and invisible war. Do you notice the pattern? Miguel doesn't enter where everything is calm. Miguel comes in where something needs to be broken. Miguel enters where a rebel force is trying to advance. But this raises another question. If God has absolute power, why is there a war? Why are angels fighting? Why does Michael lead when God could just shut it all down in an instant? The answer does not appear as a direct explanation. It appears in the way heaven works. God rules with authority, and this authority is also manifested through order, functions, envoys, messengers, princes, and armies. That is, Michael leads not because God is absent, but because God's authority is being executed. And this changes the view of war. It's not chaos against chaos. It is rebellion against order. It is pride versus obedience. It is an illegal advance against an authorized defense. And this is where everything starts to get deeper. Because if Michael leads angels, then those angels are not acting in isolation. There is organization, there is hierarchy, there is command. But how do these invisible armies work? And why does the Bible show this war as if there was a real structure behind what no one sees? When the Bible talks about angels, many people only imagine bright, still calm beings, almost like figures in a painting. But Revelation 12 shatters this image. There, the angels appear at war, and not just in war. They appear linked to a command, Michael and his angels. This expression changes everything, because your angels suggest alignment, organization, and mission. It's not everyone fighting in their own way. It is not a confused crowd moving aimlessly. There is leadership. There is a front. There is a defense set up against the rebellion. But there is one detail. A spiritual army does not function like an ordinary human army. The main strength is not in visible weapons, earthly strategies, or numbers we can count. The lies strength in the authority that supports the mission. They don't fight to carve out space for themselves. They fight because they serve God's will. This is the difference between Michael's angels and the rebel angels. One side moves in obedience, the other moves in opposition. And that creates enormous tension, because war doesn't just reveal power, it reveals loyalty. Perhaps this is why the text separates the groups so clearly. Miguel has his angels. The dragon has its angels. Two commands, two directions, two destinations. But what defines victory is not the noise of battle. It is the authority behind it. And the more you look at it, the more a question grows. If there is a hierarchy among angels, who occupies each position? And how does this order behave when war begins? The war in heaven does not happen as most imagine. It's not a meaningless, sword-shining scene. It's not just force against force. It is not an uncontrolled conflict, as if the sky had lost order. It's exactly the opposite. War reveals that God's order remains even when rebellion tries to break it. And this is where everything changes. Because Miguel doesn't just win by direct confrontation. He wins because he is aligned with the correct authority. This is an important key. In the spiritual world, force without authority becomes rebellion. Power without obedience becomes a fall. Movement without direction turns into chaos. The dragon had followers. Miguel had a mission. It seems similar, but it isn't. The rebels fought to resist God's order. Michael and his angels fought to defend this order. So the war was not just a power struggle. It was a collision between two principles: pride and submission. But there is one detail. Spiritual strategy does not begin with the attack. It starts with positioning. Miguel is in the right place, under the right authority, fulfilling the right role. And that makes your leadership different. He doesn't improvise. He executes. While the rebellion tries to occupy space, Miguel prevents their advance. As the dragon tries to stay, Miguel presses on until there is no more room for him. And that sentence is heavy. No place was found for them anymore. In other words, the war ends with expulsion, not just defeat, removal. But before looking at the result, there is one question that needs to be left open. What really happened the moment Miguel advanced against the rebels? And hen comes the moment when the tension is no longer hidden. Rebellion appears. The confrontation begins, and Miguel advances. Revelation 12 does not describe every movement of the battle, but it reveals the gist. Michael and his angels battled the dragon, and the dragon fought too along with his angels. This shows that it was not symbolic resistance. There was real opposition. But there is one detail. The dragon fights, but does not prevail. It moves. He resists. He tries to maintain position, but he can't stay. Because war reaches the point where rebel authority finds its limit. And this limit has a name: Miguel, leading the defense of God. The text says that no place was found for them in heaven. This sentence is the final blow. It's not just losing a battle, It's losing access. It's losing position. It's being removed from the environment you tried to corrupt. The turning point comes when the rebellion discovers that noise is not authority. Force is not right. Opposition is not victory. Resistance is not permanence. Miguel does not appear to negotiate with the dragon. It appears as an answer. And when that answer comes, the war changes direction. The rebels are defeated. The dragon is thrown away. And what seemed like a threat within the sky becomes an exposed defeat. But the revelation doesn't end there, because the expulsion of the rebels doesn't just show the end of a battle. It shows something bigger. Every rebellion against God may rise for a while, but it cannot remain forever. And if that's true in heaven, what does this reveal about the invisible wars still raging today? The war in heaven is not just a distant scene, it is a message. Because when Michael leads the angels against the rebels, the text reveals a profound truth. In the kingdom of God, rebellion is not treated as an opinion. Rebellion is rupture. It is an attempt to break an order that was not born from human will, but from divine authority. And that makes everything more serious. Because conflict doesn't just show who won, it shows who had the right to remain. The dragon and his angels fought, but lost their place. Michael and his angels fought, but remained under order. Do you notice the difference? One side wanted to occupy. The other side wanted to obey. One side wanted to resist. The others wanted to keep it. And this is where this battle gets bigger than it seemed. She talks about position, about loyalty, about the danger of a force that rises up against God thinking it can support its own throne. But no rebellion creates true authority. She just imitates. That's why Miguel doesn't need to appear as someone seeking glory. He appears as someone fulfilling a role. And perhaps this is one of the greatest lessons hidden in this war. In the spiritual world, winning is not about being above everyone. Winning is being aligned with God. But there is one detail. If the battle revealed the downfall of the rebels, it also revealed something about the faithful. Those who remain are not just the strongest. They are those who did not exchange orders for ambition. And this opens up a disturbing question. How many wars start exactly when someone decides to leave the place that God has established? This war seems ancient, but her pattern lives on, because every time God's command is resisted, every time the truth is distorted, every time pride tries to take the place of obedience, the echo of that battle appears again. Not in the same way, not with the same visible characters, but with the same principle. The conflict began in the invisible, but its effects affect the visible world. And maybe that's why this topic is so compelling, because deep down, he doesn't just talk about angels, he talks about loyalty, of choices, of forces that try to pull creation away from God's will. But there is one detail. Miguel appears to be defending, and this shows that God does not let rebellion advance without a response. There is order, there is a limit, there is authority, and when it seems like evil is moving freely, Revelation 12 reminds us that it does not remain forever. There is a point at which rises up against God meets resistance. Then the question comes closer to us. In how many areas of life does war begin not with noise, but with a small change of position? When the truth seems too heavy, when obedience seems too slow, when pride seems more attractive than submission. And this is where the past touches the present. Because Michael led against the rebels in heaven, But the message continues to draw attention on earth. Everything that rises up against God may seem strong for a while, but it has no eternal place. And if this war reveals the fate of the rebellion, what does it reveal about those who choose to remain faithful? And now the question doesn't get any further. If Michael led the angels against the rebels, what does this scene require of those watching today? Because it's not just about knowing that there was war. It's about you understanding what that war reveals. The rebellion lost ground. Obedience remained. Pride was released outside. God's order continued to stand. And that's not small. Perhaps the most important question is not just, who is Miguel? Maybe it's, which side have I been living on? Not in the speech, not in appearance, but in the hidden choices. Because all spiritual warfare begins before it appears. It starts in the secret place, in intention, in the direction of the heart. And this is where everything comes back to square one. In heaven there was war, but the victory did not belong to the rebels. He belonged to the order of God. Michael led, the angels remained, and the dragon lost his place. So keep this: whoever rises up against God may even make noise, but he does not remain. Those who remain under God may even face war, but they are not alone. Now, I want to ask you a question. When you look at this battle, what stands out to you most? Michael's leadership, the fall of the rebels, or the fact that God always maintains his order? Comment on your answer, because perhaps the next step is to understand something even deeper. Why does Miguel appear precisely at moments when the invisible comes into conflict with the destiny of men?